Hey everybody, it's Sandria and Dr. Sam. Welcome to Black to the Beginning, where we are amplifying the Black adoption conversation with Black adoptee voices and Black families at the center. Today's discussion is so important because Black adoptive parents are often invisible in this adoption community. They do exist, and our focus today is Black motherhood and Black adoptive mothers. We're going straight to the source with our guests, and we'll also be tapping into the wisdom of our first Black to the Beginning read selection, Motherhood So White by Nefertiti Austin.
Joining us today is Dr. Christine Beliard, the creator and curator of FAB Moms, aka Fabulous Adoptive Black Moms. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and supervisor who has provided clinical services to families over 15 years. In particular, she is specialized in the provision of relevant training and direct services to African American couples and families. As a professor, trainer, speaker, and consultant, Dr. Beliard's work centers on the historical racial trauma on couples and families of color. Her greatest achievement is her family. She and her husband, David, married on, get this, 12, 13, 14.
That's so cute.
And they are the proud adoptive parents of David, nicknamed DJ, and Ava.
Mm-hmm. So wonderful. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank y'all for having me.
Absolutely.
We are super, super excited to talk to you.
As am I. I just am so, anytime I get a chance to talk about Black adoption, my experience adopting, I am more than willing to do it. So I'm just so excited for what you all are doing, and I'm excited for our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll jump right in really quickly just to set the scene for people who have not read Motherhood So White yet. This is a memoir. Look, we are ready. This is a memoir by Nefertiti Austin. She is an author. She is also an adoptive mother. And this is her story of going through that process as a single Black woman, which is another side of this story that you don't hear often enough. So we're excited to have this as our kind of our background, just to jumpstart us into this conversation about Black adoptive motherhood. And the first thing that we want to get into, there's a quote in Nefertiti's book where she says, "Adopting a child I did not know was breaking code. White people did shit like that." And we actually dropped that as a meme today on our Instagram and on our Facebook. And so, Christine, we just wanted to know, starting off, what did adoption mean to you before you and your husband pursued it?
I love that question. This is why I'm so glad that, we're talking about Motherhood So White, because as I was reading it, there were things that really resonated with me, and there were some things that didn't as much. So for me, I didn't really see it as adoption outside of your family was something that white people did. Early on in my life, I did know a few people who had adopted. And then when I went to grad school, I was an intern at an adoption agency. So I saw a lot of kids that needed adoption. So I don't know, like for me, it was a bit different. So for my journey, that like when you are exposed to so many children who are of color, we know the disparity exists, your heart just goes out. I remember having kids ask me, like, can you take me home? At the time, I'm like 21. I don't have a home. But I remember those moments, like trying to bring as many gifts as I could, with the little dollars I had. So my heart was already kind of being pruned for adoption. So even when I met my husband, we had talked early on about being interested in adoption. But I will say there's so many assumptions that I had. Like, for instance, I assumed whenever I wanted kids, I could have them. Well, we got married. Well, prior to us even getting married, we found out that I had issues related to infertility. So it was one of those things where we just knew that we had to really consider our options. So we pursued IVF. And then there was just like, the story's kind of long, but for us, we just knew for sure that we wanted to make sure that we explored all options. And then it just came, our children really came to us. So we never like formally applied for adoption. And again, through relationships, another Black woman that I knew, she had actually told me about their story. And that's, the rest is kind of history with our adoption story, as far as us starting the process for ourselves.
Were there people either in your family or your close circle of friends that you knew who were adopted or had adopted children themselves?
Isn't it so funny looking back? So retrospectively, like actually when I was reading Nefertiti's book, when she talks about her own story and having this Black adoption, which was informally adopting, I never thought about it because my mom, she always tries to join whatever we're doing for FAB Moms. And I'm like, Mom, you're not a FAB mom. Like, you cannot join. But then as I was reading the book, I'm like, my mom is a FAB mom. We had a cousin that she took in. And he was raised next to me like he was my brother. And this is over a 10-year period. But we never considered her an adoptive mom or my cousin an adoptee. So I will say I had my own moment reading the book. And then looking back, I had a friend, she never mentioned that she was adopted, but then word got out, how things can go. And I found out years later that she was adopted. And so I just always, like what I found now, journeying through adoption, is that all of us are touched by adoption. It's just whether we know it or not.
Yes, that part.
Right.
What was the feedback? I guess I'm curious about your personal story. Like, what was the feedback as you were going through this adoption process with your first child? Just from your family, from your friends, because now you're kind of like the first person in your circle who's doing it in this way.
Well, since we have a little time. So what happened with us, we knew we were dealing with IVF. We were most likely going to do IVF, which at minimum is going to cost at least $20,000. We did not just have that money laying around, and there's no assurance that it's going to work. And so we actually went on a trip to Cuba, and we took part in like this, like fertility ceremony. And this man he's like, you're going to have 2 children. So I'm thinking biologically. I kid y'all not. The next week we get back, and it was actually one of my students who's the director of adoption. Anyways, so she had told me about my children. She's like, I don't know if you're interested in adoption seriously, but there are these siblings. And she told me a bit about their story. And it was just, and from that point on, we just kind of knew that these were our children. So as far as the reaction, first, I had to really settle in myself, like, I have never had a child. And then here I am, an instant mom to a 2 and a 3-year-old. That's on the same day. Okay. And then on top of that, I have to, have a conversation with my husband. Like, I remember presenting it to him. We were planning our Christmas party. So I'm like, by the way. And, it was just one of those things where I know God must have laid on his heart too. So there really were some deep conversations. Like, this is not something that you can start and then, oh no, we changed our mind. We had to really be sure of what we were doing. Right. And then talking about it with our families. And I will say there were so many things that I assumed that would be a struggle that actually weren't. Like, I was so scared people would treat my children differently since they weren't our biological kids, as far as my family, my husband's family, friends. But that's really not been our case. I mean, there's been a few situations, just small comments, but we just get that nipped in the bud and keep it moving. So I think I was most surprised by how supportive everyone was. Like, we ended up having like 4 welcome parties to welcome our kids.
I was going to ask you if you had a baby shower. Okay.
Yeah, so we had like a welcome home party. We had one, like, I'm from Texas, so one with my family in Texas, one with my job. We had one at our home here. We just had a lot of different parties, and there was just so much love and support. And I guess my fear was that I wouldn't be accepted as a mom, my kids wouldn't be accepted as our children, but it's really not been the case.
And when you talk about that fear of not being accepted as a mom, I know Nefertiti mentions in the book about her feeling like an imposter when Mother's Day would come around. And it took her like 5 years to get over this. So have you felt that, especially on Mother's Day?
You know what's interesting? No, I actually have the exact opposite. But I think what may be different in my story, from the beginning, we had an open adoption because now we adopted through foster care. And oftentimes there's a myth that, it's closed. And I will just say, I think that a lot of negative stereotypes about these birth families are perpetuated by a lot of people, Black people, white people, whomever. And I just connected to, if you think about it, when people say like, oh, you're adopting from foster care, to me, that's almost code word for these are some crazy Black kids or whatever it is, you know? But these are all of our kids, and usually their parents or grandparents were really trying to cope with very oppressive systems. So to me, oftentimes kids in foster care are literally the symbols of institutionalized racism, oppression. So I think the more that we try to disconnect from their experience, we're disconnecting from ourselves and our children. So for us, I remember even having social workers tell us like, oh no, the way they would try to paint the birth family, for us, we couldn't sleep at night not knowing more about these human beings. So we decided to break our anonymity. We're connected with family members on their father's side, birth mother's side. And it's actually been the most beautiful thing. Like our kids were actually just with their birth dad's family for the past weekend.
Wow.
We got a good break. I just picked them up yesterday. We've traveled together. We attend family events. They come to their birthday parties. And to me, it's been the most beautiful thing. But I can't just say that as if I didn't go through a journey. Because when you mention this imposter syndrome, they were so supportive, and they still are, of course. And I think for me, I had to be comfortable. Like for mine's not Mother's Day because their birth family would call me Mother's Day. Like, we are rooting for you. You're doing well. My family. So I don't really feel it on Mother's Day. Mine was actually when I first got my children. Because just imagine, you're just single, fancy free.
Right.
Okay, then it's you and your husband. Y'all travel. You're still living your life. And then all of a sudden, you have these two children. And I remember going to pick up my kids. Because first, of course, we did the visitation. I'm trying to YouTube and call my sister, how do I put in a car seat? You know, like, I don't know what to do. Make sure these kids are safe.
New mom struggles like any new mother. Yeah.
Yes. And so then I remember one time I was at this party, and it was, a kid's party. So parents are talking. And so this mom asked me, she's like, oh, so you had your kids back to back? I mean, how is that to be pregnant back to back? So it's like in those moments, okay, am I going to talk to her about how I just have, like, my kids just came to my home about 3 days ago, but I'm not going to do that at a party. So in those moments, it's like, how do I enter into a conversation? I'm trying to make connections with moms, as I'm in this new mom world, but then recognize that everybody doesn't need to know their story or what have you. So that to me was more of dealing with the imposter syndrome. But now I feel very comfortable. So I agree with Nefertiti in the book, where you could just really see her evolve as an adoptive mom.
So, go ahead.
Now, you talked about being very open, of course, with your children, and the fact that they've essentially known from the beginning. There's a part in the book where Nefertiti talks about when her son has entered kindergarten, and that he was able to articulate, he was adopted, that he lived with his mom. What are your thoughts on if or when a child should be told they are adopted? So we recognize that you made a certain decision, but were you ever torn? Like, is now an appropriate time? Should I wait?
Well, just by nature, I'm always looking into things. So with my children, even before they came, I was doing so much research. And I do recommend for anyone considering adoption, or you're already starting your adoption journey, join different Facebook groups, not simply the ones that are like adoption support group that are open to all races, which that could be helpful. I didn't find them so helpful, but I really found African-American adoption groups, and especially ones that included different members, if you want to use the language of triad, because I didn't want to just hear from adoptive moms or dads' experience, but what about adoptees? Because if we believe it or not, they do grow up, you know what I mean? And
right? We are here.
Exactly. And so that's who I really wanted to hear from. Like, I know how, I know some of them may wonder, like, okay, well, what is it like for the adoptive parent? But I'm always interested in what's it like for the adult adoptee, because my kid, one day they're going to be in you all's position. So for us, we ended up going to an adoption camp, and we assumed, because it said it was for parents of adoptive kids of color. I assumed there'll be a lot of people of color there. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what spearheaded me starting Fabulous Adoptive Black Moms. I went there, and I've just never had a scene like this in my life. The first night they had all the kids, you know, on the floor for like a welcome program. And about, I would say 90% of the kids were Black. I don't know their ethnicity. And the parents, we were all seated behind them in chairs. About 90% of them were white. So just to see like this dichotomy, the first session, I just cried. My husband just had to console me. It was just, it's one thing if you're walking through Target and you see two white parents with their Black adopted kid. Okay. But to see like a sea of Black kids and to see their parents, and let me just say, for me, it was just a call for action. Like, I just did not think that most Black people knew what is really going on when it comes to kids that are truly looking for a home. And I really believe that Black adoption is so critical, because what I did appreciate about this conference, they centered the voices of the adult adoptees of color. They were their mentors. They were on panels. They shared their stories. They had birth parents come and talk. And just the themes for me that emerged were that a lot of them questioned, what would my life have been like if somebody Black would have stepped up to adopt me? You know, so for me, that was it just broke my heart in a way that I had to do something.
And not to call out this camp in particular,
right.
but what's been your experience just being in this space as Black adoptive parents where you're in the minority? So whether that's in the camp, whether that's in these social media groups and blogs, like what has been your experience?
Well, not just with the camp, but I will say going there, I remember they had to keep making announcements. There were a few people of color, and they tried to have a track for parents of color. And that was nice, but the conversation really centered on how we're not getting our needs met here, because a lot of the other parents, they would almost think that we were a part of their education process. Like, oh, what do you think? I'm like, okay, I'm here for my children.
Right.
You know what I mean? They had to start announcing, like, allow them their own space. So for me, it didn't feel too safe for me. But I tried at first to join like Facebook groups. Anything that had adoption, I was joining. And again, it just, to me, was almost traumatizing to hear some of these parents, the questions they would have, the comments you would hear. And then I would see that a number of Black people would try to start commenting, offering our voices, and we were shut out oftentimes. And so that's a common theme too, that racism is perpetuated. It definitely through adoption groups and all of that. So for me, I just couldn't focus too much on that. And so that's why I said, I just want to help create a safe space that does censor the experiences of Black mothers who have adopted.
Wow. And Nefertiti does talk about that a little bit. So she makes mention of that for our listeners. If you also have the book in front of you on page 242, she states, in many cases, despite their best intentions, the stories shared by white adoptive parents of Black kids feel like an attempt to appropriate their parenting space by either whining about their privilege, fretting over what to do when love fails to conquer all, or exalting how special they are for helping the less fortunate, often with little acknowledgement of Black adoptive mothers, fathers, and other families of color. And I think that is precisely what you just did, you know, here. And that's so interesting. So when you found that you were in this space and you're like, okay, I need to do something for Black adoptive mothers, how easy or difficult was it for other Black mothers to divulge that I too am an adoptive mother? Or was there some secrecy or some shame around that title?
That is such a good question, because I haven't really talked about this before, but I just assumed when I started Fabulous Adoptive Black Moms, the reception would just be amazing, immediate, because I knew that there were Black adoptive moms out there. And so what was placed on my heart was to create a retreat. So I created this retreat, and I'm just a planner. So I have like this bomb hotel, we're getting massages, we're going to do equine therapy. It's just amazing. And then I started getting these individual messages like, hey, before I sign up for the retreat, can we start like, you know, a private group? You could just tell, like, it was like, I don't know how much I'm willing to expose myself. Can you tell me about the other moms that'll be there? Basically, everyone wanted to know, is there another mom like me? I think that's important, that even though we're FAB moms, there's so much diversity amongst us as women, and then diversity in our experiences, our values, which I honor, which I think that's so helpful. So actually, due to COVID-19, we had to postpone our first retreat, but we're still gonna have it. But we started doing.
Look, I want to come. Can we come?
Yes, yes, please. We're gonna have adult adoptee panels. Please come down to Fort Lauderdale.
Look, don't tempt me with a good time.
No,
Yes.
come on. It is gonna be fabulous, as our name states. But one thing that's been so beautiful, I just said, well, you know what? We can't meet in person, so let's do a Zoom call. I didn't know who was gonna show up. I know a few FAB moms that I've connected with. Interestingly enough, we all have different experience, different levels of comfort, sharing our stories, connecting. So I didn't know. The first call, absolutely beautiful, because I'm sure you all can relate to this as adult adoptees. When you're in the presence of another Black person who has a shared experience, some things don't have to be said. Some things, you just connect on it. So that first conversation, I was scared that there was gonna be like this awkwardness. So I had all these little games prepared or conversation starters. I never had to use one of them. And the conversation just flowed. And you could tell there was so much that people wanted to share. People wanted to connect. And so we've been doing those bi-weekly, and they've just grown and grown and grown. And the response now has been amazing. Like, what I love about it, which is no surprise, but when you get a group of Black women together, something's gonna move. So we've already started having so many different things that we've been doing, getting together, planning. So for me, I just feel so privileged to help, curate and facilitate the space.
What are some of the things that, as you have these conversations with other Black moms, Black adoptive moms, what are some of the things that you all need? Like, what are, just from a larger community, so whether that's, other Black people in general or Black adoptees, like, is there anything that you need that you feel maybe is missing from the conversation?
That's a good question. Well, I will say, even in our last conversation, we started talking about this idea of openness. Some of us are in open adoption, some of us are in closed adoptions, and some of us fall somewhere in the middle. And a lot of us talked about really wanting to have conversations with adult adoptees, because it's one thing for us to give each other, encouragement or advice or our thoughts, but to me, there's nothing like really building genuine relationships. And that's the thing too. I don't want it just to be like voyeurism or like, oh, tell us all your story. No, but like, how do we really connect and have these relationships with people that are connected to adoption, but not in the position of the parent? 'Cause I think that's different. We need to hear other voices too. I would also say a lot of the women want to make sure that there can be more FAB moms. I think all of us in some way adopted, yes, sometimes out of a desire to be a parent, but there's so many kids who their only desire is for a FAB mom, to be honest, right? So it's like so many FAB moms want to share their story, want to be able to let other potential FAB moms know, like, we're here. So any platform where the moms can talk or share their story. So right now we're actually planning like a foster care 101 where different FAB moms are going to share like, okay, prior to entering the foster care system as a parent, what are things you want to know? What are some myths? This is how you would even introduce a child into your home, to your family. So really walking other potential FAB moms through our journeys as a way for outreach to hopefully increase the numbers. So I will say, which is not uncommon, even though I really see it as, let's have a space where these women are supported, because we need that. We're doing, like a lot of women, a lot of stuff, but no matter what, the women really end up talking about how they can give, how they want to have other children, have, a forever family. So that's one thing I'm always just amazed by, just wanting to do as much outreach as we can.
So you touched on a little bit about this difference between like open versus closed adoption, and that even being a factor in how people talk about, their adoptive parenting journey. I think my question here is, again, you've had a very open, adoption, and the desire from what you're saying is that you want to hear from Black adoptees or adoptees period, right? Like once they, are adults. If someone has decided, you know what, I'm going to have a closed adoption, I will make the decision when I see fit,
Right.
to introduce my child or to tell the child that they're adopted, whatever it is that, goes along with that from the adoptive, parent standpoint. How would FAB Mom support that type of adoptive mother? That's like, you know what? I'm not doing that right now. I'm going to wait for the child to be older.
This is such a good question because this comes up so much. Just a little bit about my story. Come to find out, by opening up the adoption, first we connected with our kid's birth dad's family. And then I just had this lingering need. I'm like, I need someone on their mom's side. Anyway, I ended up connecting with their great aunt. Come to find out, she shared so much information, and how it happened, she's also a FAB mom. So it's like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
And I even found out the kid's great grandma's name, same name as mine. So I always think I could have missed out on this. My kids could have missed out on this. So actually, when we left that adoption camp, we met up with her for the very first time. And my daughter looks exactly like her. So I just bring that up because I've seen the beauty. Sometimes we focus on what could go wrong. What if, and I understand the fears. Some of these fears I have. My kids could grow up and it's like, okay, bumpy, I'm going with my real family. That I think is a fear for most adoptive parents. But then I think you really have to center your decisions on whose anxiety is this and whose anxiety am I protecting? Because I think we really have to lead out of love. And I'm not saying that open adoption is the case for everyone, no. So that's my perspective. But for FAB Moms, we create an open space. Because I don't want to say, okay, no, we only accept moms who are in open adoption. Because how do you evolve? How do you grow? How do you hear the stories? So we just opened it up. And I thought it was so amazing on our last call. We were talking about this. A few of the moms say, I had never really thought of it this way, but I'm going to consider, if I open this up a bit more, how this would look. So to me, even when those wheels start turning, but I think that only happens if you create a safe space. So we really don't have a stance on if it should be open or closed. I think it's what is best for the child. Because I do believe that most people, they want to know about where they're from, what their roots are. Now, I do understand. I know people always even say oh, but it's not safe. Okay, when we say not safe, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
For real?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not safe for whom? So, and again, I know there may be some extenuating circumstances, so I don't want to, make light of that. But I think in most situations, even if it is, okay, we can at least send a card, a picture, some way. Because I think for me, and I know in the book, Nefertiti said she would rather deal with if her child grows up and she has to deal with them being angry that the adoption was closed. For me, I feel the complete opposite. I want to do anything I can while they're young. Well, you're not about to tell me oh, you kept me. No, I didn't. No, bro, you got to come with something else. Okay, so if something else comes down the road, I did the best I knew to do. Now, of course, that could be that, something could, I don't know. But I mean, when I think about the possible outcomes, if you have your kid biologically adopted, whatever, people are their own person. So I just can't parent out of fear. So that's just been my choice. And I think I've just seen the beauty with the complexity.
And I think, Samantha and I, we're probably biased in this particular situation just because we found out so much later in life, in our 20s and our late 30s, which for me is problematic.
Right.
But I definitely understand that, parents, they make decisions that they believe are best at that time. But
and I mean, just to say a little bit more about that, I love what you're saying. They make the choice that they believe is right at that time. And that's why I think, and what I hope that moms can offer is a space to hear other voices and stories. Because for me, I wasn't sure. I'm like, I don't know, because you hear so many negative, even like I said, our social workers were really hoping that we would close the adoption. But when I start really listening to adult adoptees, to me, with my heart, hearing these stories, to be honest, I don't remember hearing one adult adoptee saying, I'm so glad that my parents kept the information. I just did not hear one story from what I read, from what I heard in person, I just didn't. So for me, to me, that carries more weight sometimes than hearing adoptive parents say, oh, well, I just didn't want to open that can of worms, or who knows. So, but again, I understand people have different, ideas on why they choose open or close.
Something I want to get into, because of course the book is called Motherhood So White. And you kind of touched on this a little bit just with, the experience at the camp and just in the larger community, but this reality that Black voices are often missing from the conversation. And Nefertiti, she mentions in the book, despite the long history of relationships between Black mammies, nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers for white children, our consistent erasure in parenting literature confirmed that mother in America would always be read as white. And so I would love if you could talk a little bit about what that phrase motherhood so white means to you, but then also define, what does motherhood so Black look like? What does that mean?
Well, I think for any Black mom who hears the title Motherhood So White, it's just an instant connection. It's like, oh, I get it. Like, it because you live it. I think it's almost akin to if you heard America So White. It's like, if you're a person of color, you get it. Where our voices are so marginalized, our experiences are so subjugated. I can just remember starting the adoption process, and I could not put a face to a Black woman, besides maybe one woman that I knew at the time, who had adopted. So to me, that tells the story right there. I remember I worked in adoption. Mm-hmm. So this idea that even for me, an adopted mom was a white woman. So I think it's just, when you think about white supremacy, oppression of those voices, then it makes sense why motherhood is so white. So when it comes to Motherhood So Black, I think, I remember when I was starting FAB Moms, I got so many questions from family members, friends. They were like, okay, I love that you're doing a adoption thing. And I love that it's for moms, but I don't know about the Black part. Do we feel like we have to have that out? And I'm like, yes, we do.
Yes.
So for me, I am unapologetic about censoring the voices of Black women. So that is definitely intentional. And I remember when I posted something from FAB Moms in one of the adoption groups, the larger adoption groups, the first comment was, I'm so sick of this. This is so racist. Aren't we all So even our mere presence as Black adoptive moms, Black moms in general, for some, that is a threat, So I think for Motherhood So Black, what I found is that we really are communal. Like, just like I said, that instant connection with other Black moms who have adopted. And this idea that, oh, you need this, I got you, I support you, I see you. And that we parent in the face of so much adversity. And I just have to add, we do it fabulously. So that's why we added the fabulous, because sometimes even when we hear our stories, or even if it's about a Black adoptee, or I don't know when I've heard too many stories about Black adoptive parents, but it's always almost like this grim, and birth parents too, this grim story, very negative. And so I really want to look at the other side of the coin. No, there are Black mothers who are doing this fabulously. It looks effortlessly. It's not. But for me, I wanted to celebrate that and highlight that, because I think that also can help with outreach. More people saying, you know what, it's not so bad. I remember I would always get comments when my kids first came with me, and people would say things like, they're just like regular. And I'm like, yes, they are children. You can tell, like,
they're just like human beings.
And I would say that would be one of the offensive things. If people knew we adopted, you could tell they were looking at us like a science experiment, like, okay, let me see here, what's going on? Yeah. And so a part of me would be offended, but another part is like, you know what? Okay, look at us, because we're an adopted. Now you can't say you don't know an adoptive Black family. So that's one thing. And I know it's not for everybody, their journey, but like I said, my kids know they're adopted. They could probably tell me more about adoption than I'll ever know. So it's no secret. And I see the power in that. So no one's going to know anything about my kid's story that they don't know. It's not a part of their family, of course. So I want them to be empowered by knowing their story. And I know that my kids are already advocates for adoption. So I love that, because I don't want any part of their identity, any part of their family to be something that they see as they have to keep it secret or there's shame behind it. And one of my good friends gave me just a beautiful piece of wisdom when I was first adopting. She just shared, she was like, she's not an adoptive mom, but she was sharing that she didn't want anyone in her kids' lives to be a family member that she doesn't consider a family member. She was talking about in-laws. I'm like, that's so good. So like with my kids' birth family, if that's their family, that's my family. So if somebody tries to say anything, it's like, okay, hold up. Well, we're not going to.
Right.
And so for me, I see that as part of my advocacy, but then to me, that's out of love. Because again, like I said, I really think that all of these are our kids, these are our families. So the more that we try to perpetuate these negative stereotypes or what have you, then we're almost like perpetuating racism.
Mm.
You've given us a mouthful, that's for sure. We do have one more question for you, however, just in light of everything that is occurring in America So White right now. You have a Black son.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts? And again, we had Nefertiti, who was raising a Black son, or is raising a Black son. So we have something in common there. What are your thoughts on how you're going to prepare him to live in, our current state, if you will? And does parenting from an adoptive perspective change anything?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because like you said, with the state of affairs, even right now, there's no way not to consider these things. So even before I logged on, my husband had on the news and my son was in there, and the news station was talking about the case with Mr. Floyd. And my son asked, he's like, what happened? And so in that moment, I either decide I'm going to act like this didn't happen. Because part of me, it's like, you're 5 years old. You're going to have to carry this burden for so long. A part of me wishes that I could just allow you to hold on to your innocence for as long as you can. But at the same time, I know that at 5 years old, some people already see my 5-year-old son as a threat, Mm-hmm. So in that moment, we told him what happened. So he's like, well, why would they do that to him? And we explained to him that there are some people that think just because the color of our skin that we're less than. So, we talk about racism, we talk about oppression, and he has questions. But I love to do that because I don't want him to get educated in the wrong way. I want him to be as prepared as possible. But I will say, interestingly enough, I remember prior to adopting, when I was going through infertility, I remember thinking, okay, if we do IVF, I'm going to have a child. And I just think, this sounds bad, but it's like, if I invest so much money, this kid comes up, like, I got to protect this baby, right? And I don't know how this is going to sound, but this is so for real. Adopting has actually, in a way, given me this freedom. I feel like I'm a spiritual person. I really know that God taught me through adoption that no kid is your kid. They don't belong to, a child does not belong to a parent, okay? So they are their own person. So with that, in a way, it's kind of giving me a freedom, like I'm here to serve as a guide as best I can. There's no way that I can protect my son from everything, or my daughter, but I know I have to really prepare them as best I can. So I try to allow that to relieve my anxiety, because I do think, because I am a therapist, the more that a parent holds anxiety, the more that you're going to translate that to your child. And that's not what I really want to translate. I want him, because to me, I see that as a form of resistance, a Black person being able to live in their freedom. Mm-hmm. Even when everything is saying you can't be free, you can't be happy, you can't be joyous, you can't pursue happiness. I just say the more that we can just allow children to know that despite all of this, your joy is the best form of resistance. So that's what we try to instill in our children. So of course, a balance of educating them, they know what's up, but also you have every right to be happy, to be joyous, to pursue whatever dream you want.
I love it. I love it. And not only are you, instilling this sense of freedom in your children, but you are giving this freedom to Black mothers, giving them the freedom to mother fully. So we just want to thank you for all that you're doing, all that you're sharing. Where can people find out more about FAB Moms?
Okay, well, we have a website, www.fabmoms.org. You can follow us on Instagram at the FAB Moms, and we're on Facebook. You can look for us, Fabulous Adoptive Black Moms or FAB Moms. Oh, and you can email me if you have any questions or thoughts, Christine@fabmoms.org. So if you haven't noticed, I love to talk. So even if somebody wants to message me, because I will say, I love it. If anyone wants to talk about adoption, I love it. Just because I know that I had so many questions, so many thoughts, and I just don't think you get to a place like where you know everything, of course. So I'm always learning, evolving, and I think that's how all of our journeys are. So I just appreciate you all opening this conversation to me. I love what you're doing, and I've really enjoyed the conversation because, again, it already has me thinking about more things that I need to consider.
Yes, and I'm sure down the line we'll do a part 2, a part 3. Like there's just so much we can get into, especially once you do your retreat. So
Oh, I know. No, once
yes.
we.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Dr. Beliard, we want to thank you so much for the time that you've taken here with us today. As Sandria is saying, like we definitely want to continue this conversation. We appreciate the time that you've taken to also discuss Motherhood So White with us. For those who are listening, we encourage you to do the same. If you didn't get the opportunity to read Motherhood So White by Nefertiti Austin, please get yourself a copy. Check it out.
Yes.
And definitely feel free to continue to follow us, or if you're new to Black to the Beginning, reach out to us at Black to the Beginning on Instagram or Facebook. Feel free to slide into the DM as well.
Yes.
Thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you soon.